If you're a 3D printer and you're looking for some projects that may involve your children, you may be interested in some small car projects made by printednest.com. These are designed for younger children. You may want to build it with them. You may want to build it for them. And this is a series of projects called the Carmen Mini Models. And in this video, I'll go over what that project is and show you a sample build of the little Ford truck, which is on the right hand side. So Printed Nest makes a bunch of car designs. I think there's 5 different designs with garages, and there's some electrics in with it. The headlights will light up and some rear tail lights, and that always interests usually children. So you may want to build this for children if they're fairly young. If they're interested in learning about electricity, you may want to build it with them and show them the basics of setting that up. So this is what we're going to do is look at building a small Ford truck. It's got tail lights, which are red, a couple headlights, which go on and off. They're all powered by a lithium button cell. Now the parts are fairly easy to build, so if you go on printednest.com you can download. There is a cost, I think it's 1.9 euros per model, or you can buy all the models and the garages at I think about 10 euros, very cheap. So this shows all the sample parts that you would need to build for the truck. You can build it in PLA or PETG, I've done both. You may want to build the tires using TPU, you don't need to. You can use PLA or PETG for the tires. They'll just be slipperier on a hard surface. I started to build most of the tires on with TPU. If you use TPU, you'll see it's a little squishy. One of the things you'll notice there, it prints in that orientation and there's no top or bottom walls just to get the right type of squishiness. So if you decide, TPU is not that hard to print. I printed on a Prusa Mark III, but a Mini or any of the Creality printers. You can print it on almost anything. It prints almost as well as PETG. I use glue stick though because it can stick pretty hard, but these tires are pretty small. You likely aren't going to have any issue. But slow down your travel, about 50% of normal. I use 10% infill, rectilinear infill, 1 perimeter, no top or bottom layers, 0.2 layer is my layer height. And the temperature range depends on what filament you buy. I bought Overture and Airy one. The temperature is about 220 for the nozzle and 60 for the C. Direct drive extruders are easier to print with flexible filament. I think you can do it on Bowden's. On my direct drive, I loosen the filament screw to just grab the filament. So on a Prusa Mark III, there's a screw on the right hand side and I make sure that's flush with the nut or looser than normal with normal filament. If you want to purchase less, you can purchase 1/2 kilogram from Airy one, which makes it a little cheaper. Be aware that TPU absorbs moisture more than other filaments, so if you print a spool, put it right back in a good freezer bag. Ideally, you might want to stick some desiccant in there so it won't absorb any moisture. But don't be scared off by TPU, it's not hard to print with. Now, this model can be made with and without lights or electrics. I changed my design a little bit from what's recommended on the website. They don't have resistors on their website, and they only use white LEDs, both for the rear tail light and the headlight. So I added using a red LED and some resistors to reduce the current and make the battery last longer. Now, one problem by using a red LED is that it's got a different voltage drop than the other white LEDs. So you can't just use their recommendation and substitute a red LED. You've got to use the resistor or just use all 3 white LEDs that they recommend. The little design I did is on the right hand side, so you've got 2 white LEDs which are going to be the headlight, the red LED is going to be the tail light. I added 2 resistors to reduce the current to 5 milliamps. You don't need the resistors, but if you don't use the resistors, use all white LEDs And the resistors there, you would just connect the 3.2 volt battery directly to the diodes, and the other end, where the bar is, the cathode of all the LEDs, will all be connected together to ground. But in that case, you might run 20 to 40 milliamps if you don't have resistors. So you can get maybe 5 to 10 times the life if you add a couple of resistors. On the right-hand side sort of shows what the wiring could look like when you're done. Everyone's going to wire it a little different. So you may have some soldering tools, but if not, very easily get a pencil soldering tool. I won't spend too long on the tools that you might need, but a pencil tip from AliExpress, only about $25, even from Amazon. It's nice to get some different tip sizes, some that might be a little thicker than others. Depending on the mass that you want to solder, you want thicker tips. So if you're doing other projects besides these, you might want some thicker tips. If you're deciding that you're going to get into this, maybe you're going to build more elaborate cars, you may want a Weller soldering station. This is certainly worthwhile. It's only about $100 US, and you can control the tip temperature, and you can get more removable tips of different thermal mass, which are really useful. You'll need some wire strippers. There are a couple of cheap wire strippers here, you'll see. Or you can get this type, which is a little easier on the wire. It pulls the insulation off and doesn't score the wire. When you're using solid wire, if you score it here, it's very easy then for it to break. So, and you might not notice it was scored, so you do all this work, and as it flexes a little bit, it breaks off, and then you have to repair it. Good pair of needle nose or side cutters is really useful as well. So those are just some of the side tools you might need as well. There's a switch here which goes into a little cutout, and you can see that installed here. You've got to get it exactly the right size, and I went on AliExpress and found a bunch of things which are easy to purchase. You'll notice that these switches here are pretty cheap. The LEDs as well, you can get 100 white LEDs for low cost. If you want resistors, they have resistor sets as well. You can use paper clips for the battery holder. I'll show you why I sort of went away from paper clips, but if you're using paper clips, they've got to be metal, they've got to be tin plated. The ones I were using, the tin plating was so thin they were hard to solder to. I'd recommend solid 24 gauge wire, but what I found is that I do a fair bit of networking. Network cable which goes in walls uses solid wire. Now this is not the patch cords, but what's called the structured wiring for inside premises. And it really generally, a lot of people throw this stuff out by the miles when they're doing changes. So if you go to a contractor, have some friends, you probably can find some Cat 5e solid wire. If you get 2 to 4 feet of that, that will be all the hookup wire you'll ever need, because inside of it is 8 conductors. Now they're twisted together, so you need to untwist them and sort of smooth them out, but they'll be all the hookup wire you'd ever need for these types of projects. This is what I use to store the resistors. You can get those little kits which aren't expensive. This will store 600 resistors. So I haven't put the plans out, but just gives you some idea if you want to store them, and you can see that they're all numbered. And it folds up pretty small, so I don't have a lot of space, and yet I don't have a lot of resistors that I don't know what their value are, because I can no longer see the color codes. So I'd have to put them under a microscope. So I'll show you very quickly how we built the Carmen. These models, I think they're designated M1 to M5. The truck is the M5. It's based on a Ford design. And it starts with the chassis here, which is all in black. It's a little shiny because I built this one in PETG. I've shown the switch over here, but basically there's a hole through the chassis that you can put 2 wires here. I've used this brownish reddish one to indicate that's going to be one of my plus wires. The blue is also going to be a positive voltage wire. You'll see that, and the white will be a black wire or a ground wire. Now, although you can use a paper clip, it's nice and solid. The paper clips that I had were plastic coated, so you needed to, you can see a little bit of the plastic just coming off here. You actually need to strip this back, but then they're hard to form, they're hard to solder to. I found it was much easier to use actually cut these wires, which were stripped bare and just formed like this. And I'd put a little loop in the end here that I could solder to. Now, copper will corrode over time, but this battery forces pretty tight against it, and I think it'll last pretty long. You can buy 24 gauge wire, which is tinned. The whole solid wire is tinned. You got to make sure you don't get just the tinned ends. And that would be a better choice, and I've got that on order. It hasn't come in yet. So if we look at the back end here, this shows my back red LED and my 220. If you can read color codes, you'll know that's 220 resistor. And this is the negative side of the resistor over here. The bar side of the diagram, which is called the cathode. The long lead here is going to my switch. So basically this switch is turning on and off a connection between here, which is going to connect 5 volts to my circuit. So at the front end, the hot side of the battery, the plus side of the battery, will go through a 100 ohm resistor, and it comes right up to here, this point. And when I connect the switch or turn the switch on, it's going to connect that 5 volts and connect it to my LED. The resistor will limit the current, and this will eventually be the ground wire. Now, this brown wire is also going to allow a switched plus battery connection to go to the front. So my battery comes in here, it's going to connect across there when the switch is open, and this is going to carry that plus voltage back to the front of my car. Now at the front, this is what the headlights look like. This brown piece here, I glued that in with crazy glue. Most of these are designed to press fit, but I found they'll come apart pretty easily. Some will, so I glued that in. And at the other end, I have these resistors with the longer lead at the top, sort of bent over here, and at the bottom is the cathode, the negative end of the LED lead here that I'll eventually solder to. So this is what it looks like as I'm starting to connect this up. The top of the plus end of the battery here is making connection with this. There's a little slot here, and so this wire goes in and out and makes connection with the plus of the battery. My 100 ohm resistor here is connected to my blue wire, which is running to the back. The negative of this battery is eventually going to be connected here, which is going to connect to the negative of this LED and the negative of this LED. So what I have is this is all one long wire, and I've stripped off very carefully sections until I got this much stripped off, and then I routed that solid wire through there, and just left it out here, and quickly soldered or tacked it here and there. So that's in progress. Now, I then connected a solid wire between this brown wire was the switched plus battery. So this is going to go to my plus terminal, the long lead on the LEDs. And so it comes up here, and I stripped this much off. So it would connect here, and then you could trim this off. Now it looks like this resistor here from this picture, this connects to this negative wire underneath. It does not. And you can look a few pictures back and see that's just because of the angle of the picture. So test it all up, make sure it works. If you're doing this before you go any further, it's much easier to change now than have to take it all apart later. So when you do the switch, you should see those 3 lights come on. Then these are the axles, and you'll notice there's a little square piece here that is only added. It's a little rod. It's only added just so it will print properly. It needs to be trimmed off with side cutters, and you'll see that this has got the part trimmed off. But they're often still a little bit too large, at least they were for me, to really go in here well. So I use a nail file, and I file them, and I try press fitting to make sure that they'll go in fairly snug. They won't come out easily, but I do that and get these pegs sort of trimmed before I go any further. Now I just sort of put the pegs aside, and I'll press the body in. So you put the headlight part in first, and this will just snap up into the blue body. This will just press down. You don't need to glue this down. In fact, you shouldn't glue it down. It'll make it harder to take the body out. And if you ever want to replace the battery, which I'm sure you will want to do, this makes it harder if it's glued in. The little bed protector, I found if you just sort of bend it this way and put it down, there are little channels on each side that it'll clip into. I found this was easy. It will slide into a little slot here. Slide it in a little ways, then put the front in, and then slide it all the way down. The cab will go on pretty easily. This is the wheels. There is a right way and a wrong way to put the peg through, front and the back. And you want to make sure that they spin fairly easily there. Now, as you can see here, this is out a little too far. It should be pressed inwards a little bit, and I found that my wheel didn't turn very well, and if your front wheel won't turn easily, it might be binding up against some wire. Just press this back in, and then everything was fine. You can also use these types of pliers for getting some of those pegs in, but if you put too much force, you'll break the peg, and then you have to drill it out. There is a bumper for the front, and I found that you don't want to glue this in because then it makes this body too hard to remove to change the battery. If you find it keeps falling off, it should press fit in, but if it falls off, you may want to trim this piece across here and then glue it so that if you have to angle the body out, it isn't being held in by the front part of this underneath bumper. And that's pretty well the whole build to these. Shown here at the left is the M3 and the truck's at the right. So a nice little project. My hat's off to Printed Nest to making these available, and something you may want to get involved with your children.